7 guys. 1 dorm. No money, no fans, no guarantee of anything. In 2013, BTS debuted to a nearly empty venue, a handful of people watching, 0 chart presence, and a company small enough that failure wasn't a possibility, it was the expected outcome. 13 years later, they've sold out stadiums on every continent, broken records that hadn't been touched in decades, and built a fan base that spans every language on Earth. But here's the thing nobody talks about enough. What actually made them happy along the way? Not the awards. Not the Billboard numbers. Not the magazine covers. The real moments, the ones each member has gone back to in interviews, in speeches, in late-night vlogs when the cameras weren't there for a show, those tell a completely different story about who these 7 people actually are. Each member found joy in something distinct. Sometimes surprising. Sometimes quietly personal. So before the sold-out Wembley nights and the UN speeches, what were the moments that genuinely mattered to them? Let's start at number 7. Number 7. The proof is in the music. Suga. Min Yoongi was born on March 9, 1993, in Buk District, Daegu, South Korea, a mid-sized city roughly 3 hours southeast of Seoul. He was the second son in a working-class family that had no particular connection to the entertainment industry and no roadmap for how a kid from Daegu ends up producing music that eventually reaches every corner of the planet. What they did have was a son who decided, somewhere around the age of 13, that music was the only thing he wanted to do with his life. That conviction was total. And before BTS, before the trainee years, before any of it, Yoongi was writing and recording hip-hop in a city that had almost no infrastructure for it. He joined a local underground group called D-Town in his early teens, performed at small venues, and built a catalog of self-produced tracks while most kids his age were focused on school exams. His parents didn't support the direction. The financial pressure at home was real. At one point, Yoongi was working part-time jobs to fund his music while simultaneously preparing for the big hit entertainment audition. He passed that audition in 2010. He was 17. The trainee period under Big Hit was not glamorous by any standard. The company was small, underfunded, and operating in the shadow of industry giants like SM and YG. The trainees lived in close quarters, trained for hours every day, and had no certainty that any of it would lead anywhere. Yoongi has said in multiple interviews that there were periods during those years when he genuinely questioned whether continuing made sense. The gap between where he was and where he wanted to be felt enormous. He had come to Seoul with 1 suitcase and a second-hand mattress. He slept on the floor of the company building on some nights. He kept writing anyway. BTS debuted on June 13, 2013, under HYB, then called Big Hit Entertainment. Suga was part of the original lineup as a rapper and, crucially, as a producer. From the earliest albums, his fingerprints were on the music in ways that went beyond performance. He co-wrote and co-produced tracks that gave BTS a sonic identity distinct from the cleaner, more polished output of bigger agencies. The roughness was intentional. The emotional directness was intentional. Songs like Tomorrow, co-written by Suga in 2014, addressed the anxieties of young people facing an uncertain future with a frankness that wasn't common in mainstream K-pop at the time. That song, and others like it, started building the specific kind of connection between BTS and its audience that would define the group's rise. By 2016, Suga released his first solo mixtape under the stage name August D, a name that inverts D-Town and references his Daegu roots. He released it for free, without prior announcement, directly to fans. The mixtape was a departure from anything he had done publicly before. It was raw, dense, and deeply personal, covering his struggles with depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, social phobia, and the specific loneliness of chasing a career that had no guaranteed endpoint. Tracks like The Last were explicit about the mental health battles he had been managing privately for years. Releasing it was a significant act of personal exposure, and the response was immediate and global. Fans who had no prior language to describe their own similar experiences found them described precisely in those songs. That feedback loop, the recognition that his most honest work had the most direct impact, became one of the clearest sources of joy Suga has consistently identified throughout his career. The mixtape also demonstrated his range as a producer. The beats on Happiest BTS weren't simple. They pulled from jazz, soul, East Coast hip-hop, and traditional Korean musical elements, layered in ways that required substantial technical knowledge to execute. Industry figures outside K-pop began paying attention. From around 2017 onward, Suga began receiving and accepting production credits outside BTS. He produced Wine for Saran in 2017, which won Best OST at the Melon Music Awards. He produced Strange for RM and Whale. He worked with Epic High's Tableau. Later collaborations included working with Halsey on Suga's interlude for her 2020 album Manic, co-writing that with and for PSY in 2022. A track that debuted at #1 on the JN Digital chart and marked PSY's first major domestic chart success since Gangnam Style, and producing IU's 8, which became one of the most streamed Korean songs of 2020 and won multiple year-end awards across major Korean music platforms. Each of these collaborations represented something specific for Yoongi: external validation from artists and industries that had no obligation to include him, and confirmation that his musical instincts translated across genres, languages, and contexts. He has spoken about this in the context of happiness, with notable consistency. In BTS's 2021 documentary content, and in various year-end interviews, he returned repeatedly to the idea that the thing that genuinely satisfied him was not performance metrics or chart positions on their own, but the evidence that the music was functioning, that people were listening, connecting, being affected. The numbers were meaningful to him primarily as indicators of reach, of how many people the work had actually gotten to. In 2020, Suga was diagnosed with a torn labrum in his left shoulder, an injury that required surgery and sidelined him from portions of BTS's promotional activities. He underwent the procedure in November 2020 and spent months in recovery. He has been candid about how difficult that period was, both physically and psychologically. The enforced stillness, for someone who had been moving continuously since his trainee days, was genuinely hard. He documented parts of the recovery. He kept producing from a limited capacity. He came back. In 2023, Suga released his second solo project as Happiest BTS, a full studio album titled D-Day. Unlike the first mixtape, this was a commercial release distributed by HYBE and Big Hit Music, meaning it went through formal chart tracking. It debuted at #10 on the US Billboard 200, making Suga the first Korean solo artist to debut in the top 10 of that chart. It reached #2 on the UK Albums chart. He followed the album with a world solo tour, the Happiest BTS Tour, that ran through North America, Asia, and the UK, selling out arenas and amphitheaters across multiple continents. He performed to more than 460,000 people across the tour's total run. In August 2023, in the middle of that tour's US leg, Suga was arrested for riding an electric scooter while intoxicated near the HYB building in Seoul. He received a fine. He enlisted in the Korean military in September 2023, serving as a social service worker, a designation he received due to his prior shoulder injury, which precluded combat service. His enlistment coincided with the broader BTS military enlistment period that had been publicly discussed and anticipated since 2022. He is scheduled to complete his service in 2025. Through all of it, the early underground work in Taegu, the trainee years, the BTS albums, the solo releases, the injury, the legal incident, the military service. The thread that Suga has returned to most consistently when asked about what made him happy during his time in BTS is not any single moment, but a cumulative recognition. The recognition that music he made in small rooms, sometimes alone, sometimes at hours when everyone else was asleep, had traveled to places he had never been and reached people he would never meet. That the work held up. That it meant something to someone specific, somewhere, who needed it. For a person who started with a second-hand mattress and one suitcase, that is not an abstract achievement. It is a very concrete answer to the question he was implicitly asking during every year he chose not to quit. The answer turned out to be yes. Number 6. The warmth he found in the room, Jimin. Park Jimin was born on October 13, 1995, in Seokjin, Busan, South Korea, a port city on the southeastern tip of the Korean peninsula, known for its coastline, its dialect, and a culture that tends to produce people who are direct and warm in equal measure. Jimin grew up in that environment, the firstborn son of a family that, by his own accounts and interviews over the years, gave him a stable and affectionate upbringing. He was not a child who grew up in hardship, but he was a child who felt things intensely, and that sensitivity, which would later become one of the most defining qualities of his artistry, was present long before he stepped into any practice room. He discovered dance relatively late compared to trainees who begin formal training in childhood. He enrolled in contemporary dance at Busan High School of Arts after receiving a recommendation from a middle school teacher who noticed his physical aptitude and stage presence. Contemporary dance, not idol training, not pop choreography, but the more academically rigorous discipline rooted in modern and classical technique, became his first serious artistic language. He was good enough at it that he made the top of his class. His teacher at the time recommended he audition for big hit entertainment. He did, passed on the first attempt, and relocated to Seoul at 15. He was the last member to join the group before debut, arriving with considerably less idol-specific training than some of the others, but with a physical control and emotional expressiveness through movement that was immediately apparent. The adjustment to Seoul and to the BTS training environment was not seamless. Jimin has spoken about this across multiple interviews and in BTS's own documentary content, the sense of being behind, of needing to catch up, of watching members who had been in the system longer and feeling the gap acutely. He trained harder to close it. He is documented as one of the members who consistently stayed in the practice room longest, often after others had already gone to sleep. The work ethic was not performative. It came from a specific anxiety about adequacy that he has acknowledged without attempting to reframe as a strength. He wanted to be good enough. He wasn't always sure he was. BTS debuted in June 2013. In those earliest years, Jimin's role within the group's visual and performance identity was substantial. He was a lead dancer with a style that read differently from the others, more fluid, more internally motivated, shaped by his contemporary dance background in ways that gave even standard choreography an additional layer of feeling. Audiences noticed. Within the fandom, conversations about BTS's performance quality almost always included Jimin as a reference point for emotional authenticity on stage. He wasn't just executing choreography. He was experiencing it. That distinction, small as it might sound, is the difference between a technically proficient performance and one that people remember. But the aspect of BTS that Jimin has returned to most consistently as a source of personal happiness is not the stage. It is the room before the stage and the room after it. The relationship between the 7 members, the specific, accumulated texture of daily life shared over years, is what Jimin has described, across enough separate contexts to treat it as a genuine belief rather than a talking point, as the thing that made everything else possible and meaningful. In BTS's 2020 documentary Break the Silence, and in various Festa dinner conversations that HYB has released publicly over the years, Jimin has been one of the most emotionally expressive members when discussing what the group means to him internally. He cries at these moments, not as performance, but as a person who clearly experiences the weight of the relationships in real time. When BTS gave their speech at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2021, addressing world leaders about COVID-19's impact on youth, Jimin stood in a room with 6 people he had lived alongside for nearly a decade. His connection with the fanbase, ARMY, is equally well documented and, in Jimin's case, operates at a level of reciprocity that goes beyond standard fan-artist dynamics. He has been consistently one of the most active members in direct fan communication through platforms like Weverse and VLive, and later through Bubble. He sends messages at unexpected hours, in the middle of schedules, when he's tired, when he's had a good day. The pattern is not a PR strategy. It's too inconsistent and too personal in tone to be managed that way. He seems to genuinely need the connection and to experience something close to happiness when it's present and functional. ARMY has historically responded to Jimin with a particular intensity of affection that stands out even within a fanbase known for its engagement. That mutual recognition, being seen clearly and being met with warmth, is something he has explicitly identified as meaningful. His relationship with his own confidence has been more complicated. Jimin has spoken openly about struggles with body image, particularly during the earlier years of BTS's career, when the visual standards of the Korean entertainment industry were applied with considerable pressure to every male idol's appearance. He has discussed restricting his diet to an extent that he later recognized as unhealthy, eating one meal a day before music video filming during certain periods. He has not elaborated on this extensively, but he has not hidden it either. The fact that he brought it up publicly, in an industry where male idols rarely acknowledge physical insecurity at all, was a deliberate choice and consistent with BTS's broader approach to addressing mental health honestly. Musically, Jimin's solo work arrived formally in 2023 with the release of his first solo album, Face. It was released on March 24, 2023, and the lead single, Like Crazy, an English-language track built on dreamy, atmospheric production, debuted at #1 on the US Billboard Hot 100. He became the first Korean solo artist to debut at the top of that chart. The achievement was significant by any measure. What followed was a run of performances, interviews, and promotional appearances in which Jimin showed a version of himself that was more self-directed and independently confident than his BTS persona sometimes suggested. Not because BTS constrained him, but because the solo context required a different kind of ownership. He stepped into it without hesitation. He enrolled in the Korean military in December 2023, enlisting alongside Jungkook, the two youngest members and the closest in age, whose friendship has been one of the most consistently noted dynamics within the group since debut. They completed their basic training together and are serving in the same unit. The decision to enlist at the same time was publicly known in advance and understood as a mutual choice. Jimin will complete his service in 2025. Looking at the full arc, from the Busan High School student who was recommended to audition almost by accident, through the years of catching up in the practice room, through the sold-out concerts and the UN Hall and the Billboard #1s and the solo album. What becomes clear about Jimin's happiness is that it has always been most alive in the presence of other people. Not the crowd specifically, though the crowd matters to him deeply, but the smaller circle. The 6 men he debuted with, the fans who write to him at 3 in the morning, the teacher who told him he was worth betting on. His artistry is expressive because he is expressive. His stage presence is emotionally resonant because he processes emotion in real time and cannot fully separate the performance from the feeling underneath it. That is both what makes him exceptional and what has, at various points, made this career genuinely costly for him. He has said more than once that despite the difficulty, he wouldn't change it. That's not a PR answer. For Jimin, given everything he has disclosed and the consistency with which he has disclosed it, that reads as the straightforward truth of someone who found something in a room in Seoul in 2013 that he had not been looking for and did not know he needed, and then spent the next decade refusing to let it go. Number 5. Growing up in front of the world, Jungkook. Jungkook was born on September 1, 1997, in Myeongdong, Buk District, Busan, South Korea, the same city that produced Jimin, though the two didn't know each other before BTS. He was the youngest child in his family, already inclined towards sports and physical activity from early childhood, with no particular background in music performance and no family connection to the entertainment industry. He was 13 years old when the decision that would define the next decade of his life happened almost accidentally. He watched G-Dragon perform on a Korean music program, and something locked into place. He decided he wanted to do that. He auditioned for multiple entertainment companies in 2011. Several of them wanted him, including JYP Entertainment, which is not a small offer for a 13-year-old with minimal training. He chose big hit entertainment instead. The reason he is given for that choice, consistently across interviews over the years, is RM. During his big hit audition, he met the teenager who would become BTS's leader and was struck enough by him to trust the smaller, less established company over the more recognizable ones. It was an instinctive decision made by a child, and it turned out to be correct. He relocated to Seoul at 13, leaving Busan and his family to begin training. This is one of the more striking facts about Jungkook's BTS trajectory when you sit with it plainly. He spent his entire adolescence, every year from 13 onward, living with 6 older boys he had just met in a small shared space, under the structure of a trainee system that governed nearly every hour of his day. He didn't experience a conventional middle school social life. He didn't have the standard markers of teenage independence. What he had instead was a practice room, 6 people who gradually became something closer than friends, and an enormous amount of time to develop skills. He developed them at a rate that earned him the nickname Golden Magne, Magne being the Korean term for the youngest member of a group, golden being the descriptor added because he seemed to absorb every discipline he was exposed to with unusual speed. He could sing, dance, draw, do graphic design, cook, box, play multiple instruments, and, as documented extensively through BTS's own content across the years, pick up almost any new skill placed in front of him and reach competence faster than most people would expect. This is not mythology built by fan accounts. It is documented in enough behind-the-scenes footage, in enough variety show appearances, in enough BTS member interviews across enough years to treat as a reliable characterization. But the dimension of Jungkook's happiness within BTS that stands separately from his artistic development is the one he has discussed most directly when asked about what the group gave him personally, the 6 people who raised him. He has used that language, not exactly raised, but close enough that the meaning is clear. He joined BTS as a child. He was shaped, in the most literal developmental sense, by living alongside Jin, RM, Suga, J-Hope, Jimin, and V during the years when personality, values, and identity form. The older members didn't just influence his artistry. They influenced who he became as a person. And Jungkook has been consistent about experiencing that as a form of happiness, not just gratitude for opportunity, but something warmer and more specific than that. Jin, who is the oldest member and 6 years Jungkook senior, has functioned as something between an older brother and a household anchor in the BTS dynamic. RM has been an intellectual presence, someone whose curiosity and seriousness about ideas Jungkook has absorbed and referenced. J-Hope, as the group's dance leader, provided direct technical mentorship. Suga's work ethic and commitment to craft set a standard that Jungkook has cited as influential. Jimin, closest to him in age, became one of his most consistent personal bonds. The two are close in a way the BTS content has documented since the earliest days, a closeness that extended to enlisting in the military together in December 2023. V, similarly, has been part of a small circle of members with whom Jungkook's off-duty. The happiness Jungkook describes in relation to this is not sentimental in a performed way. It is specific. In BTS's 2020 documentary Break the Silence, in festive dinner conversations released by HYB, in end-of-year letters to fans, and in interviews that have become progressively more candid as the members have aged, Jungkook has returned repeatedly to the idea that he did not fully understand what he was gaining in those early years, that the understanding came later, as he got older and had enough perspective to see the shape of what had been given to him. The 6 older members gave him a framework for how to work, how to take criticism, how to handle failure, and how to stay in the room when things are hard. He received that education without entirely recognizing it as an education while it was happening. His development as a solo artist culminated formally in November 2023 with the release of his debut studio album Golden, but his global solo profile had already been established significantly before that. In July 2023, his single 7 featuring American rapper Latto was released and debuted at #1 on the US Billboard Hot 100. He became the first Korean solo artist to debut at the top of that chart with a first solo single. The record stayed in the top tier of the chart for multiple weeks. It was followed by 3D featuring Jack Harlow and Standing Next to You, which demonstrated range across pop and funk-influenced production. The album Golden debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. Prior to his solo album cycle, Jungkook had already performed at one of the largest single events in global sports entertainment. He was selected to perform the official soundtrack for the 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar, delivering Dreamers at the opening ceremony in Lusail Stadium on November 20, 2022. The audience in the stadium alone was over 67,000 people. The global broadcast reached hundreds of millions. He performed solo on one of the largest stages in sports, not as part of BTS, but as himself, and held it without visible difficulty. For a person who had been a shy teenager from Busan a decade earlier, the composure he displayed was itself a document of how much the BTS years had built. He enlisted in the Korean military in December 2023, alongside Jimin, as previously noted. His enlistment was widely covered and his departure, broadcast through a live stream organized by HYB, was watched by hundreds of thousands of fans simultaneously. He is expected to complete his service in 2025. The arc of Jungkook's happiness within BTS is, in some ways, the most structurally complete of any members, because it maps so directly onto a simple human process. A child joined something larger than himself, was shaped by the people around him, grew into someone capable of standing alone on the world's biggest stages, and then looked back at the years of formation with genuine appreciation rather than complicated feelings about what was given up. He has said that he considers the members his family. He has said that growing up inside BTS, even with everything that required of him at an age when most people are figuring out much simpler things, was something he would not trade. He has said these things enough times, in enough different contexts, that the repetition itself functions as evidence. The youngest member of BTS did not just survive the years of becoming. He was, in the most fundamental sense, made by them. What that kind of formation produces in a person is not just talent. It's a particular kind of groundedness, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who stood next to you while you were figuring out who you were going to be. And Jungkook knows exactly who they are. Number 4. The creative who never needed permission. V. He learned to play the saxophone in middle school and pursued music performance with enough seriousness that he auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment in 2011, accompanying a friend who was trying out. He was the one who got in. He trained for 2 years before debut, but here is the specific detail that sets his pre-debut experience apart from every other BTS member. He was kept entirely secret. While the other members were being introduced gradually to the public through Big Hit's pre-debut social media strategy, Taehyung's existence was concealed. He was not mentioned, not photographed for promotional material, not acknowledged publicly. He was revealed for the first time on the day of BTS's debut, June 13, 2013, as the group performed for the first time. His stage name, V, was introduced that day along with him. For a person who would go on to become one of the most visually recognized individuals on the planet, the debut day reveal was a quietly remarkable entrance. His voice was the first thing that separated him sonically from the rest of BTS's lineup. Taehyung's vocal range sits in the baritone register, unusual for a K-pop idol, where tenors and higher-voiced singers dominate the sonic landscape. The depth of his voice gives it a warmth and texture that reads as distinctive even to listeners with no technical knowledge of vocal classification. It became a signature. Within the BTS catalog, the songs built around V's timbre, particularly his solo tracks across their album era, function as a specific emotional register that no other member quite replicates. Stigma, his solo piece on the 2016 Wings album, is built on guilt and psychological complexity delivered through a vocal performance that leans into the weight of the lower register rather than away from it. Singularity, his intro for the 2018 Love Yourself, Tear album, is a minimalist neo-soul piece that opened the album with a controlled, cinematic stillness entirely unlike standard K-pop intro tracks. But what distinguishes V's happiness within BTS from the other members is less about the music in isolation and more about what the music represents for him. The freedom to be a genuinely multidimensional creative person without having to choose a lane. In almost every other corner of the entertainment industry, artists are categorized early and held there. You are a singer, or an actor, or a visual artist, or a fashion figure. Within BTS, and specifically within the creative latitude that BTS's scale and cultural position eventually allowed, Taehyung was able to be all of it simultaneously, without any of it being treated as a distraction from the other parts. He acted. In 2016 and 2017, he appeared in the KBS historical drama Hwarang, The Poet Warrior Youth, playing the supporting character Hansung. The role was not a vanity casting. It required period-specific dialogue, combat choreography, and emotional range across a storyline that involved his character's death. He delivered it while BTS was in the middle of one of the most intensive periods of their career. The drama aired to solid ratings, and his performance was received positively by viewers who had no prior BTS context. He released music outside the BTS framework consistently before his formal solo debut. Sweet Night, written for the soundtrack of the 2020 Korean drama 81 Class, was composed and written in Korean and English and topped iTunes charts in 116 countries simultaneously. A figure that represents one of the widest simultaneous chart footprints of any OST track in recent Korean music history. Winter Bear, released in 2019 as a gift to fans, was entirely self-composed and written in English, a quiet, acoustic piece that he produced from a personal place, without promotional machinery behind it. Both tracks reached their audiences through the simplest possible pathway. He made them, released them, and people found them. He developed and maintained a deep personal engagement with visual art that has never read as performative. He has visited the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, the Louvre in Paris, and multiple gallery spaces across the cities BTS has toured through. He collects vintage items, cameras, records, objects, with the specificity of someone who is genuinely drawn to the historical and tactile quality of things. He photographs. His Instagram presence, when he has maintained one, has functioned more like a personal visual journal than a managed celebrity account. He posts landscapes, objects, textures, candid images of members. The aesthetic is consistent and personal in a way that is difficult to fake at scale over years. His fashion engagement is equally well documented and independently established. He has been named to various best-dressed lists by publications including Vogue, GQ, and Esquire, and has been noted by fashion industry figures for an ability to wear experimental or unconventional pieces with a comfort that suggests genuine interest rather than stylist-driven packaging. He has collaborated with Celine as a global ambassador since 2021, becoming the first Korean artist to hold an ambassadorship with the French luxury house. The partnership has produced campaigns and runway appearances that position him within the global fashion conversation as a participant rather than a borrowed face. His solo debut album, Layover, was released on September 8, 2023, a jazz and R&B-influenced record built largely around his baritone and his stated preference for understated, emotionally present music over high production value spectacle. It debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, making him one of the few Korean solo artists to debut in the chart's top 5. The lead single Rainy Days and the track Love Me Again received particular attention for the production choices: minimal, warm, deliberately unhurried. Outside BTS, Taehyung has maintained a close friendship group informally known as the Wooga Squad, composed of actor Park Seokjin, actor Choi Woo-shik, musician Peak Boy, and actor Park Hyung-sik. The group has appeared together publicly, traveled together, and been documented in enough candid settings that their friendship is broadly understood as genuine rather than industry-adjacent networking. For a person who's spent his formative years in the BTS structure, the existence of a close personal circle outside that structure represents something real about how Taehyung has built a life around the career, not only inside it. He enlisted in the Korean military in December 2023. He was assigned to the Army's Special Duty Team, an elite counter-terrorism unit that requires a separate selection process beyond standard military assignment. He successfully completed that selection. The assignment drew public attention because the physical and psychological demands of such a unit are substantially higher than standard military service. He is expected to complete his service in 2025. The happiness V has found in BTS is the happiness of someone who is never fully containable by any single description and who found, in this particular group at this particular moment in music history, a context large enough to hold everything he is. The baritone who can fill a stadium. The actor who can disappear into a historical drama. The photographer who posts landscapes at midnight. The person who visits art museums between tour stops not for content, but because he wants to be there. BTS gave him a platform. What he did with it was entirely his own. That combination, the platform and the freedom to fill it authentically, is not something most artists find even once. Taehyung found it at 17 and has been building on it ever since, in every direction available to him simultaneously. Number 3. The eldest who held the room together, Jimin. Kim Seokjin was born on December 4, 1992, in Gwacheon, Gyeonggi Province, South Korea, and grew up in Anyang, a city in the Greater Seoul metropolitan area. He was the older of 2 brothers in a family that, by the standards of Korean society, was comfortably established. His upbringing was stable, his education was on track, and by the time he was in his late teens, he was enrolled in the film department at Konkuk University in Seoul, studying acting with the intention of pursuing that path through conventional channels. He was not looking for an alternative route into entertainment when he found one. He was recruited by a big-hit entertainment staff member on the street near his school, spotted while getting off a bus, approached, and asked to audition. He has told the story in multiple interviews, and his initial response was skepticism. He thought it was a scam. He was eventually persuaded to go in, pass the audition, and join the company in 2011, 2 years before debut. He had no idol training background, no dance experience, and limited formal vocal training. What he had was a natural physicality that reads well on camera, a voice with a clear, warm timbre that proved trainable, and a personality that, as his years in BTS would eventually make evident to millions of people, is genuinely and spontaneously funny. That last quality is worth treating seriously because it has functioned as one of the most structurally important elements of BTS's internal dynamic over more than a decade. Jimin is the eldest member, 2 to 3 years older than the middle-tier members and 5 years older than Jungkook. In Korean social culture, the gap between the oldest and youngest in any close group carries specific relational weight. The oldest takes on a particular responsibility, not always explicit, for the tone of the space. Jin's version of that responsibility has been humor. His jokes are famously terrible by his own cheerful acknowledgement, puns, wordplay, jokes with setups that everyone can see coming from 3 sentences away. His laugh, which is loud and unrestrained and has been described variously as a windshield wiper, a seal, and other things he has accepted and adopted as identity rather than criticism, is the laugh of someone who finds things genuinely funny and doesn't monitor the sound he makes when he does. This matters because the BTS dynamic over the years has included significant pressure, significant public scrutiny, and significant emotional weight. Groups that operate under those conditions for long periods either develop mechanisms for releasing tension or they accumulate it. Jin's consistent ability to find something absurd in nearly any situation, and to do so without undermining the seriousness of the work, has been documented in enough behind-the-scenes content, enough interview footage, and enough member acknowledgement to treat as a genuine group resource rather than a character tick. His vocal development across BTS's discography is one of the more quietly remarkable arcs in the group's history. He entered training as a vocalist without the raw material advantages some other members had from years of prior experience, and he developed through the trainee period and the early BTS years into a singer whose upper register became one of the most distinctive elements of BTS's group harmony. His solo pieces within the BTS catalog, Awake on Wings in 2016, Epiphany on Love Yourself, Answer in 2018, Moon on Map of the Soul, 7 in 2020. Each operate in an emotionally direct register that suits his voice. Epiphany, in particular, which functions as the album's introduction, is built on the concept of self-acceptance and Jin's delivery of it. The way his voice sits with the lyric rather than pushing against it gives the song a quality of earned conviction. He coined the phrase "worldwide handsome" to describe himself in a 2017 Billboard Music Awards appearance, delivered with complete confidence and absolutely no self-consciousness. And it became both a fan reference point and a window into how Jin experiences his own public persona. He is comfortable with his appearance in a way that reads as self-possessed rather than vain. He can make it a joke, which he frequently does, and he can simply state it when asked. The comfort is consistent across contexts and years, which suggests it comes from somewhere real rather than from media training. His most significant solo project prior to military enlistment was The Astronaut, released in October 2022. The track was co-written with Coldplay, a collaboration that emerged from the genuine relationship between Jin and the band, which had developed over multiple interactions, including BTS's performance alongside Coldplay at the 2021 Global Citizen Live concert. The Astronaut was performed for the first time live at Coldplay's concert in River Plate Stadium, Buenos Aires, on October 28, 2022, in front of approximately 60,000 people, in a city where Jin had no prior solo performance history and no promotional infrastructure for the song. He sang it live for the first time in that context. It debuted at number 51 on the Billboard Hot 100 and topped iTunes charts in more than 90 countries. The song functioned partly as a farewell to fans before his military enlistment, with lyrics that addressed departure and return in terms transparent enough that the meaning was clear to anyone paying attention. He enlisted in the Korean military on December 13, 2022, the first BTS member to begin mandatory military service, as required under South Korean law for male citizens. He completed basic training and went on to serve as a drill sergeant instructor at a training center, teaching new recruits. He was discharged on June 12, 2024, becoming the first BTS member to complete his military service in full. On the day of his discharge, a large crowd of fans gathered outside the military base to welcome him back, an event that received significant media coverage in South Korea and internationally. He released a new single, "I'll Be There," following his discharge in 2024, marking his return to active music. The release was received with substantial fan engagement across streaming platforms and represented the beginning of the post-service chapter that each BTS member will eventually enter as their individual enlistment periods conclude. The happiness Jin has identified within BTS, across the interviews and documentary content that span his career, is rooted most consistently in the relationships, specifically in the daily accumulated familiarity of having lived alongside 6 people through every significant experience of his adult life. He joined BTS at 18. He has known these members through every version of himself that has existed since then. He has described, in BTS's internal conversations that HYB has released publicly over the years, a sense of gratitude for the specific people the group turned out to be, not just for their professional qualities, but for their personal ones. For the fact that, across more than a decade of shared living and working and achieving and failing and trying again, the relationships held. He brings something to BTS that is difficult to quantify but easy to recognize in the footage, the ability to make people feel at ease in a room. It is a skill, and it is also a disposition, and in Jin's case it appears to be both, something he arrived with and something he has developed. The eldest member of a high-pressure group who consistently lowers the temperature rather than raising it is not an incidental presence. He is a structural one. Jin has described the BTS years as the period in which he found his second family, a phrase that, in the context of Korean family culture and the specific intensity of the BTS living situation, carries more weight than it might in other contexts. He did not expect to become a musician. He did not expect to stand in front of 60,000 people in Buenos Aires and sing a song he wrote with Coldplay. He did not expect any of the specific shape of what his life became after that bus ride in Seoul in 2011. He accepted all of it, made the best possible use of it, and made the people around him laugh the entire way through. That is, by any reasonable measure, a life very well spent. Number 2. The leader who carried it in both languages, RM. Kim Namjoon was born on September 12, 1994, in Ilsan District, Goyang, Gyeonggi Province, South Korea, a planned satellite city northwest of Seoul that was developed in the early 1990s to ease housing pressure on the capital. He grew up in a middle-class household, the son of parents who valued education in the conventional Korean sense, academic performance, structured advancement, the reliable pathway. Namjoon was good at school. Exceptionally good, by all documented accounts. His IQ has been cited at 148 across Korean media and BTS content, with enough frequency and consistency to treat as reported fact. He was the student who could do the work without much visible effort and still had bandwidth left over for everything else. He taught himself English by watching the American sitcom Friends, a fact he has mentioned enough times in enough different contexts that it has become a fixed point in any account of his background. He did not take a formal language course. He watched the show, paid close attention to the rhythm and construction of the language, and built comprehension from there. The result, by the time he was in his mid-teens, was a functional fluency that would eventually allow him to represent BTS in English at every major international platform they reached, from early American radio appearances to the United Nations General Assembly. The self-directed nature of how he acquired that skill is consistent with how he appears to acquire most things, independently, thoroughly, and with a level of attention that most people don't bring to optional education. He was already active in South Korea's underground hip-hop scene before BTS existed. Under the name Runch Randa, he recorded and released tracks within a community that was small, technically rigorous, and largely indifferent to the idol industry. He was known and respected within that community as a genuine rapper, someone who understood lyrical construction and delivery at a level that earned credibility from people who had no interest in mainstream entertainment. Big Hit Entertainment. His role as leader, a designation that in BTS's case was not ceremonial, has been one of the defining ongoing facts of his adult life. He became a leader at 16, which means he was making decisions that affected other people's careers, managing interpersonal dynamics in a shared living space, representing the group publicly in situations that required real articulateness, and carrying the weight of responsibility for outcomes that depended on many variables outside his control. He has spoken about the difficulty of that role in terms that are candid and specifically unglamorous. He has said he often didn't know if he was doing it correctly. He has said the pressure of being the one who is expected to have the answer, or at least to perform having the answer, was one of the hardest sustained experiences of his time in BTS. He has also said it was one of the most meaningful. The distinction Namjoon has drawn, consistently across interviews and documentary content spanning more than a decade, is between the difficulty of the role and the value of what the role made possible. Leading BTS required him to develop capabilities he would not have developed otherwise, in communication, in self-examination, in the ability to hold complexity without resolving it prematurely. It required him to fail in front of people who were watching closely and to keep going after the failure, which is a specific kind of education that classrooms and underground hip-hop scenes don't provide. His engagement with art has been one of the most extensively documented aspects of his public life outside BTS performance. He has visited an extraordinary number of museums, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Tate Modern in London, the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul, galleries across Tokyo, Paris, Amsterdam, and dozens of other cities BTS has toured through. He visits them privately, often without promotional context, and he writes and speaks about specific works with enough precision to make clear that the visits are substantive rather than performative. In 2018, he accidentally broke opaque Namjoon artwork, an infinity mirror installation, at the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul during a visit. The piece was worth approximately $500,000. The incident was widely reported in Korean media, and what it incidentally confirmed was that Namjoon was at the museum, not at a media appearance for the museum, but simply there because he wanted to be. He paid for the damage. His solo career has produced two significant bodies of work. His 2018 mixtape Mono, released for free without chart tracking, was a low-key, introspective record built on ambient and indie influences, exploring loneliness and urban identity in terms that were deliberately understated. It was listened to millions of times within its first day of release despite having no commercial framework behind it. His first official solo album, Indigo, released in December 2022, was a more structured undertaking, a project he described as wanting to document who he was at that point in his life, in that specific year, before mandatory military service changed the conditions of everything. It featured collaborations with Erykah Badu, Anderson .Paak, Tableau, Mahalia, and others, and debuted at number 2 on the US Billboard 200. His second solo album, Right Place, Wrong Person, was released in May 2024. His most publicly visible moment, separate from BTS's collective achievements, was his speech at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2018. He was 23 years old and had been invited to speak as part of UNICEF's Generation Unlimited initiative. The speech, delivered entirely in Korean, asked the audience to think about the pressure placed on young people to conform to others' definitions of success and invited listeners to reject shame and find their own names. The phrase he returned to most memorably was, "Tell me your story. I want to hear your voice, your conviction." The speech was broadcast globally and viewed tens of millions of times within days of delivery. He was not reading from a script prepared by communications professionals. It was, by available accounts, his own work, shaped by his own thinking about his own experience. He returned to the UN in September 2021, this time with the full BTS group, to address the impact of COVID-19 on young people and to call for continued global vaccination access. He spoke again in Korean. He was the primary English translator and explainer of BTS's message in subsequent international media coverage of that appearance. This is the consistent pattern across BTS's decade-plus of international engagement. Namjoon is the member who steps forward when the room requires someone who can say the precise thing in the right language with the right weight behind it. He enlisted in the Korean military on December 11, 2023, serving in the Army's 2nd Infantry Division. He is expected to complete his service in 2020. The happiness Namjoon has described within BTS is inseparable from the fact of growth, his own and the group's simultaneously. He has said that watching 6 people he was responsible for become people who no longer needed him to hold everything together was one of the deepest satisfactions of his leadership. He began as the person who had to carry BTS's public articulation almost alone, in both Korean and English, because no one else was yet equipped to. Over time, each member developed their own voice, their own public presence, their own ability to communicate who they were without him as intermediary. He watched that happen from the inside, year by year, and has described it, not in grandiose terms, but in the specific language of someone who actually saw it, as the thing he is most proud of from the entire BTS period. The leader who carried the weight, and then watched the weight become shared and found, in that distribution, something better than the original arrangement he had managed alone. That is not a small thing to have made happen. Number 1. The Sunshine That Was Never an Act, J-Hope. Young Hoseok was born on February 18, 1994, in Gwangju, South Jeolla Province, South Korea, a city with a specific weight in Korean history. Gwangju was the site of the May 18th Democratic Uprising in 1980, a pro-democracy movement violently suppressed by the military government at the time, resulting in hundreds of civilian casualties. It is a city that remembers what it cost to insist on something better. Hoseok grew up in that place, in a household with a father who worked in a bank and a mother who was warm and engaged enough with his early interests that he has cited her consistently as a foundational source of support. His older sister, Young Dawn, is now a well-known social media personality in South Korea. He grew up in a family that was present and stable, which is not the universal experience among BTS members, and which shaped his baseline orientation toward the world in ways that his career has consistently reflected. He found dance before he found music. In Gwangju, As a child and then as a teenager, he trained in street dance with a local crew called Neuron, specializing in popping, locking, and the broader family of styles that fall under the hip-hop dance umbrella. He was good enough to compete at a regional level and to be recognized within Gwangju's local youth performance scene as someone with genuine ability. The technical foundation he built during those years in Gwangju became the basis for everything he would later do as BTS's dance leader. A role that required him to not only perform at the highest level himself, but to help teach and standardize choreography across 6 other people with different natural aptitudes and learning speeds. He joined Big Hit Entertainment in 2010, trained for 3 years, and debuted with BTS in June 2013. His stage name, J-Hope, was not arbitrary. It was a declaration of intent, the role he understood himself to be playing from the beginning. In Korean, his name Hoseok contains the character for hope. The stage name made that explicit and public. It was a commitment made at 19 to the idea that his function in this group would be to carry and project energy that lifted the room. He has spent the decade plus since making good on it. The sustained positivity that J-Hope brings to BTS is one of those qualities that requires examination rather than simple acceptance, because sustained positivity in high-pressure professional environments is almost never as simple as it looks. The entertainment industry in South Korea operates with intensity that has been widely documented: the training systems, the public scrutiny, the physical demands, the loss of conventional adolescence, the early accountability for outcomes. Every BTS member has spoken about the difficulty at some point. J-Hope has too. What distinguishes his relationship to that difficulty is not that he is immune to it, but that he has developed, either by disposition or by deliberate choice or some combination of both, an ability to move through hard periods without allowing them to collapse his outward expression. The members have credited him explicitly, across enough separate contexts to treat it as a shared observation, with being the person in the room who reliably shifted the energy when it needed shifting. That is a functional role, not merely a personality trait. His work as a solo artist within the BTS framework has produced some of the most substantive achievements in his career. His 2018 mixtape Hope World, released for free, as was standard for BTS members' early solo projects, debuted at number 38 on the US Billboard 200, making it the highest charting album by a Korean solo artist on that chart at the time of release. It was a colorful, genre-fluid project that moved between hip-hop, funk, pop, and psychedelic influences in a way that reflected both his range as an artist and his genuine pleasure in making music that didn't take itself too seriously. The mixtape received positive coverage from American music media, including Rolling Stone, which noted the breadth of his production references. In 2019, he released Chicken Noodle Soup, featuring Puerto Rican-American singer Becky G, a track built around a sample of the 2006 Harlem anthem of the same name. The music video depicted dance culture across multiple cities and countries, and was notable for its celebration of collective joy through movement, a theme that runs through J-Hope's work with enough consistency to be recognized as intentional. The video was filmed partly in Seoul and partly in Los Angeles, and Becky G's presence brought the collaboration genuine bilingual reach across English and Spanish-speaking markets. His first full solo studio album, Jack in the Box, was released in July 2022. It was a deliberate departure from his previous solo output, darker in tone, more aggressive in production, dealing with themes of ambition, identity, and the pressure of expectation. It was not the colorful, upbeat project many might have anticipated from J-Hope, and that gap between expectation and delivery was part of the point. The album debuted at number 17 on the US Billboard 200. It served as the artistic foundation for his Lollapalooza appearance the following week. On July 31, 2022, J-Hope became the first Korean solo artist to headline a main stage at Lollapalooza, one of the United States' most established and widely attended music festivals, held annually in Chicago's Grant Park. He performed on the Grant Park stage to a crowd exceeding 70,000 people. The set ran approximately an hour, covering material from his solo work and selected BTS tracks adapted for solo performance. American music media coverage of the set was broadly positive, with commentary noting the production quality, the physical performance level, and the crowd engagement. For an artist whose career had been built primarily within a K-pop framework, headlining Lollapalooza represented a crossing of a specific threshold, recognition by the Western festival circuit on its own terms, of an artist who had earned a place at its top level. He enlisted in the Korean military on April 18, 2023, the first BTS member to enlist, doing so voluntarily and as an active duty soldier rather than in a social service capacity. He was assigned to the 36th Infantry Division. He was discharged on October 17, 2024, completing his full active duty service. During his enlistment period, he released Hope on the Street Volume 1 in March 2024, a project connected to a Disney Plus documentary of the same name that documented his relationship with street dance, returning to the discipline that first defined him as a performer before any of the BTS years happened. His charitable activity has been documented and verified across multiple instances. In 2019, he donated 100 million Korean won, approximately $75,000 at the time, to his former high school, Gwangju Global High School, specifically for scholarship funding for students facing financial barriers. His mother separately donated to Child Fund Korea in his name. The donations were confirmed through official institutional announcements. They were not publicized by his management. They became public through the recipient organizations. The happiness J-Hope has described within BTS is the happiness of someone whose stated purpose, to be a source of hope and positive energy for the people around him, has been, by every available measure, fulfilled. He has said in multiple interviews and in BTS's internal Festa content that the moments that mean the most to him are the ones where he can look at the 6 members around him and see that they are okay, that the group is intact, that the thing they built together is still standing and still producing something real. He has cried at award ceremonies, visibly, without composure, in the specific way that happens when accumulated effort and accumulated love arrive at the same point simultaneously. He cried at the 2021 Net Asian Music Awards when BTS won Artist of the Year. He has described the ARMY's presence at concerts as something that functions on him physically, that performing for that specific audience produces a feeling he cannot replicate in any other context. For J-Hope, the happiness was never located in the career achievement itself. It was always located in the act of giving something energy, movement, music, presence, and watching it land with the people he was giving it to. The Lollapalooza crowd. The 6 members in the practice room at midnight. The army in stadiums that took years to fill. He came from Gwangju, a city that knows what hope costs, and he spent a decade distributing it freely. That is the number one. 7 members. 7 distinct lives. 7 completely different answers to the same question, what made you happy here? Suga found it in the evidence that his music reached people he would never meet, proof that the work in the small room mattered beyond the small room. Jimin found it in the warmth of the relationships, in the daily texture of being known and being held by people who chose to stay. Jungkook found it in the formation, in having been shaped, during the years when shaping is irreversible, by 6 people who turned out to be exactly who he needed them to be. V found it in the freedom, in having a platform large enough to hold every version of himself simultaneously, the vocalist and the photographer and the actor and the fashion figure, none of them forced to yield to the others. Jin found it in the humor, in the capacity to make any room lighter, and in the accumulated weight of a decade of shared experience with people who became, without anyone planning it that way, his second family. RM found it in the growth, in watching 6 people he was responsible for develop into people who no longer needed him to carry everything, and recognizing that transition as the best possible outcome of leadership. And J-Hope found it in the act of giving, in the daily practice of bringing something generative to the people around him and to the audiences beyond them, and finding that the practice never ran dry. What BTS built over more than a decade is not just a discography or a fan base or a record collection, though it is all of those things verifiably and substantially. It is a document of what happens when 7 people with genuinely different interior lives commit, through all the difficulty that commitment actually costs, to building something together and to being honest about what that building required of them. The happiness they found wasn't despite the hard parts. It was built inside them. If there's one thing this channel has always believed, it's this: the most interesting stories are never the highlight reel. They're the room before the stage, the conversation after the show, the quiet decision to stay one more year and see what the next one brings. These 7 stayed. And what they made of that staying is the story. Thanks for watching. If you made it to the end, you already know why this group matters. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.